Ladies and gentlemen, can everyone hear me? Okay. Audio okay? Perfect. So welcome to Workshop 3, Systems Thinking. So as you would know, hopefully now, this is our last workshop evening. So from next week, you'll actually be going to your tutorials, which will be handled by our fantastic industry experts, and you'll be working on some more hands-on skills, particularly when it comes to using data to make strategic decisions. So this is the last workshop on the more theoretical thinking behind developing digital strategy, and our next module, starting next week, led by our industry team, will be looking at the more practical side, particularly related to data. So if you're still not 100% sure in terms of where you're supposed to be or where you're supposed to log on, just let me know, shoot me an email. I know there's a little bit, always when you have mixed mode classes like this, there's always a little bit of confusion. So please let me know if you've got any questions. However, you should be able to see which class you're enrolled in through your digital workspace. So that's your first port of call, but if you still can't figure out, feel free to give me a contact or you shoot me an email. I would have emailed your tutorial group separately, but I've used the most recent class list that I have. So if you've not received an email from me and you're still not sure where you're supposed to be next week, just let me know. Okay. Always a little interesting. There's a little bit of feedback coming through to the audio on the Zoom. Okay. I think if I stay right here, it might work. So last week we looked at design thinking as a way to develop digital strategy. And this week we're looking at an alternative way of solving business problems. And that's called systems thinking. So I'm sure that all of you have done the pre-readings and the pre-watch the recorded videos. So hopefully we'll just be doing a short recap of systems thinking and then going straight into thinking about how it's applied to developing digital strategy, and then also looking at some case studies where it has been applied. And then our last session for today will be actually looking at comparing the two approaches to solving problems or developing strategy to solve problems. And that's quite important because that's part of what you're required to do for your assessment. So that discussion will hopefully be very enlightening. So systems thinking, the first thing I would like to do is kind of get a sense of what your level of understanding is. And last time I went around to different students and got some insights in terms of what the key principles of design thinking were. So we're going to try something a little bit different tonight. So instead of going around to individual students, I'd like you to go to the Go Soapbox app. And there's a short 4 or 5 questions, I can't remember exactly now, 4 or 5 question systems thinking quiz. And this is not for marks, this is just to give you a little bit of feedback in terms of your own understanding and where that sits, and gives me a little bit of insight of how much recapping we need to do before we start into the group activities. So the access code, hopefully everyone can see that. Unfortunately not that team, we tried to reboot that system, but it doesn't seem to have worked. So go soapbox.com, and the access code is 928-205-002, and we're looking at the Workshop 3 Systems Quiz. So I'll just leave that up there for a moment. And then, once you've completed it, we'll have a look at the results. Incorrect answers will kind of show up in red, and correct answers will show up in green, and that will just give me a very general sense in terms of where we are at the knowledge stage. No, I can't get any closer. I'm not walking around, so sorry guys. Can you at least hear me a little bit? So participants on Zoom, is it a bit better? Okay. All right. We'll stand really close to you, Salia. All right, so everyone got that material? I might have a look at the site and see, check on everybody's progress. This one here. So in progress, 27 people, and we've got 11 completed. So we'll just wait, give everyone a couple of more seconds. And then we'll have a look at the results. So another minute or so, and 21 completed. That's wonderful, guys. So in terms of overall progress, there's a lot of green there, so I can see that most people answered those questions correctly. We have some confusion on question 4, so we'll just briefly go through these answers, but particularly focusing on question 4, just to add a little bit of clarity around that one. Okay, so what is systems thinking? So most people got this correct. Is it a type of programmatic advertising, a way of classifying digital files, a human-centered problem-solving approach, or the study of how systems behave, interact and influence? Choice 4? Most people selected choice 4, so that's exactly right. So it's the study of how systems behave. So does anyone want to expand on what a system is? What are we talking about when we talk about systems? Are we only talking about things like the human body, the solar system, the ecosystem? What do you mean? What do we mean by the term system? Anyone? Yeah. It's in simplistic form, it's a collection of stuff, right? It's a collection of elements, it's a collection of components that when they're together and when they interact, they create something that's larger than the whole. So those independent systems perform some function, but all together they perform a larger function. So for example, if you're looking at your body as a system, you have your respiratory system, which circulates air around your body, and that's the specific purpose. Then you have your circulatory system, which circulates blood around your body. But all of those separate parts put together make up a whole that is a human, right? So that's one of the key components of systems, is that they are composed of different subcomponents, or different parts, of different stuff, that each might have its own function, but together they form a whole. They do something all together as well. So systems thinking is a set of tools or methodology. It's not a fixed framework. And yes, that's absolutely correct. So true. Most people got that correct. There's no one way of employing systems thinking, very much like design thinking. Every organisation, every teacher, every academic is going to have a slightly different view on how to implement this. But there, like design thinking, there are some common principles that are important. All right, so this is the one where there's a little bit of confusion. If you're looking at a system when, you can identify the parts affect each other, and the parts produce an effect that is different from the effect of each part. So that's basically what I explained before, right? So the answer for that one is all of the above, choice 4. So a system has to have all of those things. You can identify separate parts. They all interact together, maybe not in a linear way. And as a whole, they accomplish something that's greater than the sum of the parts. And then lastly, drawing conceptual models is a key step in soft systems methodology. So that's the methodology that we focused on in this particular unit. So true, false, and it's true. So it's one of the key steps. Is drawing different conceptual models of the system from different stakeholders' perspectives. So that's one of the core components. We don't just draw a system or how it's supposed to look from the perspective of one stakeholder, like the customer, but we would draw it from the perspective of multiple stakeholders. It might be other agents involved in the purchase decision, or it could be different types of customers. But typically, you would be drawing multiple of these models according to soft systems methodology. Excellent, guys. So that's given me a good sense that most of us have a fair understanding of systems thinking, and we can kind of jump right into it. So this is a little summary video of systems thinking, how it's applied to business analysis. So when they're talking about BA or talking about BAs, they're talking about business analysts. So this is the type of role that you might have if you worked at a consultancy. So organisation has a problem, they get a consultancy like Ernst & Young to come in and review their problem. And systems thinking is one of the ways in which they can do that. So we'll have a quick look if it works, because we did have some technological issues at the start of this. But if not, you do have the link, and you can follow the link at your own leisure. It's just a summary video that I found quite helpful, because systems thinking, like design thinking, is quite complex until you wrap your head around it.
Systems thinking is about looking at things.
Let's just increase the audio a little bit here. Okay, that should help.
From a systematic and holistic point of view. And it doesn't have to be related to technology to be systematic. It's about seeing the parts of the whole and the whole in its parts. BAs that are effective at systems thinking see connections that are not easily known or seen by others. Systems thinking allows BAs to see how one thing impacts another, catching impacts and missed requirements that are so crucial to success. Systems thinking allows us to break down big concepts into smaller pieces, as well as abstract up the details to see the bigger picture. It helps us find what matters and what's connected within a lot of details. So, where does Brady the BA use systems thinking? Well, let's look at a few examples. First, when Brady gets a request for what seems to be a small change, system thinking helps see the impacts on other things. Yes, that's right. So many times a stakeholder requests something small, but in reality, it has a much greater impact. Systems thinking skills help us analyze for and catch these impacts. Next, Brady gets a request for what seems like a big change that is too abstract. And in reality, there's a lot of detailed impacts. Great systems thinkers can see how something big impacts the details and can drive out where these details are and what the impact is. And last, Brady evaluates how a potential change will impact other parts of a product, system, or process. If you've been a BA for any amount of time, you've definitely seen these examples happen. BAs use various tools and techniques to help with systems thinking. There are many techniques that help us connect the people, process, and technology to catch these impacts big and small. Things like using process analysis and data flow diagrams are just a few examples of our toolkit as BAs to help with systems thinking. It all comes down to decomposing bigger things into smaller things, like story slicing and functional decomposition techniques. Sometimes this is called chunking. It's about being able to abstract up a bunch of details into something bigger that's meaningful. Decomposing and abstracting allow us to see, model, and connect things that were not obvious before, creating better requirements and better outcomes. This is what systems thinking is all about. I can't imagine a great BA without it.
So delivery, a little sketchy, but the idea remains the same. So with systems thinking, it's termed as the way to see the forest through the trees, but not lose sight of the trees. So you're wanting to map the whole system and how the different components interact with each other, but not lose sight of those individual components and the effect that they can have on the bigger picture. Now, systems thinking mindset. So this is just highlighting the types of things that, as a systems thinker, you would do to approach a problem. So you'd look at the big picture, look about the interaction, consider the implications, also look at things over time, so not only at one point of time, cross-sectionally, but across time, and then look at if there's any changes that occur across time. And these are all good kind of principles to take in mind. But how does this relate to digital strategy, or how has this been implemented traditionally in developing digital strategy? Well, that's the question I'm going to put to you, but I'm going to give you some clues. So this particular article, and you can read more through this link here, this Ad News link, are about the top predictions from creative agency or communication agency CEOs. So here are what the top minds predict will be the future of communication agencies going forward. And so I've pulled out some ones that are particularly relevant to this subject, right? So Saatchi and Saatchi's CEO said that as data and technology become ubiquitous, so everyone is using data and technology, everyone is using digital channels, creativity becomes the most important tool for distinguishing between brands. There's a similar sentiment here from TBWA CEO, where, after 5 years of being distracted by ad tech, programmatic, and AI, next year we'll focus back on the brand building, platform ideas, and creativity. With the kind of central message that digital is important, technology is important, data is important, but it's not the only thing that's important. So that's part of what we're doing here in this unit, is not only looking at the channels, but looking at the broader strategy, how we actually solve problems rather than, learning specific channel mechanisms. This is where it became quite interesting when I was looking at this article. So Clemenger BBDO, CEO, said that we'll continue to grapple with how brilliant ideas and brilliant delivery / system thinking comes together. Interesting. So what are they implying in terms of where systems thinking is typically used in digital strategy? So you have your ideas and you have the delivery. What are we talking about in terms of delivery? Quite tonight. It's the sorry. Yeah. So it's the delivery, right? It's the communication channels that we use and how those things interact. So it's the media system. So it's how social media interacts with display advertising. It's how display advertising interacts with EDMs. It's how the media landscape interacts all together to deliver that creative message. So typically that's where systems thinking has been used in the past in digital strategy, is how do we put together a media program that's interconnected, that follows the flow of consumers and their media use consistently. So it's about mapping and understanding the different types of media vehicles that are accessed, when they're accessed, how they're influenced. So if you get an EDM on your mobile, do you go to your desktop and do some further research? Or if you've done a search, does that then, through retargeting, or if you've gone to a website and left things in a shopping cart, does retargeting in your social media page then remind you to go back and finish the purchase of those items? It's how your different media interact to lead consumers on their purchase journey. It's not the only way in which it can be applied, but that's typically how it's been applied, is looking at the media landscape or the media system, ecosystem. So in saying that, let's have a look at our first case. So as always, I've got the link there if you prefer to read the case rather than sit through my summary. But what I would like you to think about as we're going through this case, and what you'll be discussing as a group at the end of it, is how systems thinking was applied in this particular case, and what other aspects can you think of that would have potentially benefited from a systems thinking approach. Okay, so those are the two questions to keep in mind as we go through this case, because that's what you guys will be discussing off that. So this case relates to the United States Navy. So it's a top US employer, but it's basically the part of the Defense Force of America. And they faced a problem where they had typically low participation of females in the Navy at this point in time. So they wanted to increase the participation of women in the Navy. And they found that there were several factors contributing to why there was a disproportionate amount of men in the Navy compared to women. So several factors, including lack of awareness as a career option, some misconceptions about what it would mean to have a career in the Navy. So for example, being a sailor is a man's job. If you're a female, you're only typically going to be doing traditionally female roles, so you'll be the administrative assistant, but not necessarily the large machinery mechanic type thing. And then lastly, the Navy was just the furthest thing from these young women's minds. It just didn't occur to them when they finished school and they were looking at different career options. It just wasn't top of mind for them. So what they did is they started by developing a very detailed profile or persona around who they saw their target audience to be. So this is the description that they provided. So motivated young women who like to get their hands dirty during the day and wear heels at night. So kind of challenging those stereotypes of having to be a certain way to be in the Navy. Active, because physicality is part of the job, being in the Defence Force, who longs for a job that will challenge her in an important and interesting way. She wants to make a difference in the world, but doesn't want to be bored, and she's no stranger to pushing her limits physically, but she might also have traditionally feminine traits. So really not trying to stereotype women that would be interested in the Navy as a career, really trying to open up the target audience profile. So their approach, their media approach was as follows. We also talk about the creative approach in the next slide. But they recognised through research that the target audience did not consume media in a linear fashion. So there was this phenomenon that we've talked about previously in class where we access multiple media channels at the same time. So for example, the example they provide is that while they're reading a news article online, they're chatting on Facebook, the television is on in the background, and the iPod is playing their favourite audio cast. So engaging with multiple mediums at the same time, and not necessarily in a linear fashion. So the target references a variety of different media sources. So they're not married or they're not committed to one particular media source. They do engage with a whole range. And knowing this, they developed a strategy where content was distributed across multiple communication media. And the way that they managed this was through communication flow diagrams. So you can see here what media channels they selected and how those connected to one another. The Facebook fan page, that was driven by Facebook ads and a viral Facebook quiz. So both of those were paid social media strategies, and then an owned media, their own Facebook page to kind of curate and collect a community of people, or community of women that were interested in this type of career. But they also used in-ad games and online banners. They had quite a sophisticated approach there in cinema advertising, where it was linked with SMS and mobile ads. So people that attended and saw a cinema ad, that was followed up with SMS and mobile ads that directed women to the website. So that was the media side of things. In terms of the creative played off the notion that if he can do it, so can I. So a general tone of empowerment. So if you look at some of the banner ads, so these were some of the paid Facebook advertising ads and other banner ads. I love getting dressed up for work, and we have a lady here in full kind of parachuting gear. I'm not sure exactly what type of gear that is, but or ship gear or whatever. And so that was the execution style. That was the idea. So that sense of empowerment, that there wasn't trying to break through that stereotype that there was only these certain job opportunities available to women in the Navy. So in terms of results, so in that roughly 6-month period, they had just over 100,000 site visits, 105,000 video views, and most importantly, 359 lead submissions. So people contacting the Navy saying, I'm interested in a career, or women contacting the Navy saying, I'm interested in a career. They found that 20% of the site traffic was attributed to the in-game advertising and the in-cinema ad placements. That was followed up with the SMS. They also developed a Facebook fan page of about 9,000 women that were interested in discussing the Navy as a potential career. All right, guys, so in your groups, discuss how was systems thinking applied in this case, and do you think there were aspects that could have benefited from more application of systems thinking or a different type of application? So think back to what you know about soft systems methodology. Was there anything that was missing that could be added to add further value to what they've done? All right, guys, I'll give you about 5 minutes to discuss in your groups, and then we'll discuss as a class. I didn't pause the capture. Oh well. All right, guys, we might start the discussion as a class. So how was systems thinking applied? All right, guys. Thanks, guys. Your attention, please. All right, so how was systems thinking applied in this case, knowing that it is a 2009 case, so it is the start of the integration of things like systems thinking. So systems thinking came from information systems discipline, whereas design thinking came from the design discipline. So how was systems thinking applied in this case as a first point? Any volunteers that willing to share?
We thought in this case that it was most apparent in their media selection because it looked at the whole media landscape, but also at the individual parts and how they work together, but it didn't necessarily seem apparent too much of anywhere else.
Yes, and that's exactly right. So I think that's a very fair assessment. So for those of you that might have not caught that, it was most apparent in looking at the selection of media as a whole, but also looking at the interactions between those media. That's exactly right. So in following on from that, was there anywhere that you think it could have been applied more extensively, or anywhere that it would have, or any way in which it could have been even more beneficial? Yeah. Yes, I totally agree. So similarly, if we think about to the RSCQ case where they mapped the consumer journey, the customer journey, to actually surrendering their pets, what's the kind of process for leaving that expression of interest? How easy is it? What were the selection criteria? What were the barriers? What kind of systems and processes were in place that might have posed a barrier? Even if someone was interested, once they looked at the application form and it's 40 pages long, did they just decide, oh no, too hard? Yeah, that's an excellent point. Anywhere else? Or any way in which, even if you were going to look at it from a media perspective, any way that systems thinking could have been even more beneficial from the media perspective? Over here, thanks. Just so that other students can hear, sorry.
I think the the female empowerment ads, the way they did it, it's not a lot of empowerment. It's not that attractive. Like, I don't know, they brought on the slides, sorry, not on the slides, but on the ads, like, I am the girly girl.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's not really attractive. It doesn't make a woman feel powerful.
Yeah. So how do you think that systems thinking could have helped in identifying maybe more powerful creative ideas or motivational lever?
I think they could have targeted women in obviously feminist in a different way. They could have done it in a way that didn't refer to discrimination or specific stereotyping.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting because I think that you've probably landed on one of the potential drawbacks of employing a systems thinking approach. what would that be? So we're talking about the executional effectiveness. So the point being that I just don't think that the creative idea was particularly compelling in this case. Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because when you have your design thinking, they are thinking about the consumer. What will appeal to the consumer, not how will the system work together to create something larger than the whole,
Yeah.
and then fail on the creative to actually capture that attention to get them to the point of that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So design thinking is human-centered at its very core. So it involves a lot more in terms of understanding how the target audience thinks, what are their emotions, those empathy maps, how do they think, how do they feel about careers at Navy, where systems thinking, although it does take into account different perspectives, it is not as useful at identifying those underlying psychological drivers. We could use it to look at the system of thinking that occurs when people try and or consider signing up to the Navy. So that was the point that one of the lovely groups made was, well, could you map the different thoughts that women went through when they considered joining the Navy? And then, based on the thought maps, the different steps to the point where they would consider a career, could you then intervene at those different steps? So I thought that was quite a creative application of systems thinking. So mapping different psychological drivers or different stages of thinking. So there is the potential for it, but in general, the consensus in the literature is that design thinking, the strength is really that human-centered aspect of it. So really understanding the target audience in a lot of detail, where systems thinking is more broad picture. So I think one of the slides is, systems thinking is top-down, whereas design thinking is bottom-up. So from the consumer, what that one particular consumer is feeling or thinking, versus how does the system work as a general way. Although your idea for application of systems thinking at an individual level is quite creative as well, I have to say. So continuing on our discussion, do you think it might have been helpful, and the thing that came to mind for me was they identified a communication flow. So they did well, and they said, well, these types of media interact with one another, and we want them to interact with another because we know that we get multiplier effects. So if you see something as a display ad, which is then followed up with, great, email marketing or other ways of connecting to the consumer, the more contact points that kind of connect you to the idea, the better. But I thought it was interesting that they didn't map out what the women who were currently in the Navy, although there were few, what their process was to actually signing up, what media, how did they come to know about the opportunity. So I thought that was interesting, and that could have informed the media strategy as well. So the current women in the Navy, how did they actually get to the point where they signed up? What media channels did they use? And was there something that they could leverage off of? So that's the potential too, even in the media side of things, that could have been improved. Any other further comments? Wants to share? Okay, let's have a look at our second case, which is arguably a more sophisticated application of systems thinking. So let's have a look. So the case here is the Bank of America case. So again, the case, if you'd like to read in a little bit more detail, the link over here. So the Bank of America is a banking brand. Surprise, surprise. The name would never tell you that. Just joking. Wanted to increase the brand's sales volume, essentially. So what's important to banks and banking institutions, among other things, is a strong customer base with deposit accounts, active deposit accounts, because that gives them their investment base. So that's very important to banks. They want people with deposit or everyday accounts with money in them. So they wanted to increase the number of people that had deposit accounts with the Bank of America. So the problem that they faced in achieving this was that in this omni-channel world, in this complex media ecosystem that we have, different consumers, different target audiences, take different and complex paths to purchase. So they found that because of that, because there were different paths to purchase, and particularly because there was a digital aspect of it, switching barriers are lower because it's just easier to switch. So they found that the switching to a financial institution was shorter, there were fewer barriers, and this was an issue. So people could leave much more easily through the digital technologies than they could have if they had to physically go to the store back in the brick and mortar days. So what they really wanted to do was, when people are thinking of switching, they wanted to identify meaningful points in time or meaningful influences during that process that they could use to get people who were thinking of switching to switch to deposit accounts at the Bank of America. Does that make sense? So because you no longer had to go to a physical bank, close down your account, because you could do most of this online, there were a lot more information online, a lot more channels that you could contact the bank with, chat channels and so on. It just was an easier and simpler process to switch. They were finding that a lot of people were switching. And they wanted those people to switch to Bank of America. So they found that in terms of the target audience, there were, I'm not sure what this unit is, to be honest, I'm thinking like 1,000, but I'm not 100% sure. Does anyone know what that would be for? So it's a unit, like instead of, I can only think it's like MM for like millimeter or 1,000, which makes sense to me, like 24,000 consumers switching banks annually. And this is across the whole of America, so it's a big population. So let's just go with that. I guess the particular number doesn't matter. We'll just go with the MM stands for 1,000. So they found that the largest opportunity was among these 24,000 consumers that were switching banks annually. But they really didn't know how to engage these people and how to funnel them into opening a banking deposit account with Bank of America. They also found that every year there was a seasonal rush of young adults needing a checking account or a deposit account, so about 14,000, let's say, through May to September. So when students were leaving school and going off to college, typically needing their own bank account, and there was this flood on the market of these young people seeking to open deposit accounts. And they found for this particular audience, parents were quite the influencer. So what they decided to do was, so they'd recognised the opportunity. The opportunity was there's all these people switching because it's much easier to do so in a digital world. But we really need to understand, we need to identify and visualise the dynamic and network nature of the acquisition of a checking account. And basically, they need to understand the different media that was accessed and in what order in order to switch and to open a new deposit account. So they did some qualitative research to get a understanding of shopper inflection points, areas of need of recognition, awareness, and consideration. So when people were recognizing that they wanted to switch, when they were increasing their awareness of different options, when they were considering different options, what types of media, what types of points were they considering at each one of those stages? So to build off those qualitative insights, they did a quantitative survey to map out the purchase journey. So for each segment, and they had those two primary segments, the switchers and those young people who are opening checking accounts. So for each segment, they wanted to develop a path to purchase. Let's have a look. So this is the path to purchase. Once they did that big survey, so 2,100 people, they used dynamic path maps to visualize the complex interactions in the path to purchase for each of the critical segments. So those two critical segments, the switchers and the young people. So they had a map like this for each one of those segments. So just to kind of take you through the map, just for interest's sake, because I found it quite interesting, they found that of the 2,100 people surveyed, most of those people, when they were considering switching, the first thing they did was online research. In comparison, only 18% actually talked to friends and family, like talk to people, different people, maybe colleagues or advisors and so on. So right off the bat, you can see that initial search is going to be important, right? Because that's the first point of contact. Then from there, there's 35% of that 57% went on to open an account on the website. So there was a direct kind of line going through here. But there is also offshoots. So you can see that people then went to open an account in store. But some also went on to talk to other people once they've done some online research. Some went to a shopping website or a comparison website, one of those like iSelect or Compare the Market type websites. And then sometimes went to open the account in store or went to the website. And so you can see there are a lot of complex interactions. And this is only for one of the target audiences. Now, the other thing that they mapped was the influence. So not only the path, but how influential each one of those different touch points were in the final decision. So if you look, the really dark colours, the dark blue colours, very influential. So again, you can see online research here being quite important for this market segment. The lighter blue indicates that talking to people and going to the local store were less influential channels to actually finally opening that checking account. So the maps highlighted where and when marketing could engage the target consumer during the journey in order to keep that positive momentum and in order to get them to this point where they actually open the account. So you can see here they also highlighted how many people actually stop or drop out of the this purchase system. So 23% of the 57% actually just stop at online research. They don't go on to open an account. They don't go on to talk to anyone else. They just stop. Same with, not same with, but 19% after they talk to people, 11% once they've actually gone to the local store. So interesting. Once they're at the local store, there seems to be quite a good conversion rate there. The maps also uncovered opportunities to engage the barriers and friction points and highlighted opportunities not previously considered. It's one of those key aspects of systems thinking, right? So in terms of execution, so what did they do once they had analysed these maps? So I've just highlighted the campaign for the student segment. I have actually gone into the switches segment just because of time. If you would like to see what they did for the switches segment, feel free to have a look at the case study online. So for the student segment, they found that the security protection, the lock and unlock functionality, and the ATM convenience were those top 3 purchase considerations. And they basically used Creative to emphasize those 3 points, and they delivered it through media that reflected their purchasing journey. So you can see that paid search and paid social timed at graduation and the student rush were kind of core aspects of their strategy, which maps onto the fact that most people start with doing online research. Right? So making sure that Bank of America is one of the top search results that come up when people are looking for switching banks, very important. Paid social, another way, particularly at graduation when opening a checking account is top of mind for this group. They also had geo-targeted ATM advertising, and then mobile open an account apps and desktop open an account apps. There were 3 different email versions, and they also followed up with some TV, but it was mostly a digital campaign, primarily centered on making sure that Bank of America was front and center when it came to the online research. So what were the results? The student campaign achieved better than expected results, showing 8% stronger account onboarding than projected, and a good favourable brand equity generated as a result of the campaign as well. Right, so in your groups, how was systems thinking applied in this case? But more importantly, how is it different from how it was applied in the first case? And what can you see to be some of the benefits and the drawbacks of that? All right, guys. Just in the interest of making sure we get out on time tonight, some of the conversations I was having, I was just saying to Salia, some of the conversations I was having was morphing into kind of a discussion of, well, what's the difference between design thinking and systems thinking? So if we get onto that in our discussion of this one, that's fine. So the last activity was really looking at discussing what are the differences, and which do you think is more appropriate for digital strategy. But if that comes up in our discussion here, we might just roll it into one as well, because that seemed to be what was happening in my small discussions, is that it kind of morphed into a larger discussion of, well, how is it different? So how was systems thinking applied in this? Something's flashing at me. Sorry, guys. The recording system is flashing at me, which is not a good sign. What does it mean if it's flashing this? I actually think it's an audio problem. QT flashing Echo 360. It's supposed to just be red. No. Maybe I'm just not seeing that correctly. That is flashing green and red, isn't it? Green and orange. Maybe that's amber. The recording has been paused. Excellent. All right. Where's that? There we go. How was systems thinking applied in this case? What do we think? Since I know that you guys know the answer. Any volunteers? How was systems thinking applied in this case? Do you want to try? Yeah.
No, not really.
Any other?
How is it applied?
Yeah.
Very thoroughly. Thanks, we thought.
Yeah.
To be honest, we thought that it was really interesting that with the different touch points that they were also impacting on the parents as well as the student. And so it was quite a widespread, I guess, a wide field of capturing different people, I guess, into the different streams for the target markets.
Yeah, excellent. So they took a very broad view when they were mapping those customer journeys. And really that's one of the core ways in which systems thinking is evident, is that they didn't just go, well, we're really good at doing social media campaigns, and we know that, customers really engage with social media. So you know what, we're going to do a social media campaign. And that's going to increase our deposits because, we're really good at it, and, this young target audience always engage with it. So there's the rationale. Let's go forth. Let's do a social media campaign. That wasn't their approach, right? They had a very systematic approach. They went, no, what is the different touch points, as you mentioned? What are the different media touch points that people go through when they're actually looking at switching banks, and how can we intervene in this system at the right point to actually bring their business to Bank of America? Does that make a little bit more sense to you guys? So they took a very systematic approach to developing particularly their media campaign. They didn't just go, oh, well, mobile's really big. Let's do a mobile video campaign because people really like mobile content, and that's going to work. No, they took a very, very strategic and systematic viewpoint. What are the media that people actually use to support them in their journey? And then let's focus on those media. Does that make sense? So how is it different to the previous case? This was a lot more systematic, wasn't it? So where they mapped how the different, so when America's Navy just mapped the communication flows, so they thought, okay, well, these types of media tend to work well together, and we're going to use these types of media to reinforce each other. Bank of America really took that next step. And went, well, we have different target audiences. So remember, part of systems thinking is that you don't just take one stakeholder's viewpoint, right? So we look at different stakeholders, we map different segments, and we looked at a way of how their purchase journey, how their system or media ecosystem worked to the point where they actually were going to be switching with the bank.
What they did was, it was a very generic way of system thinking, and this was more impactful, like impact analysis of each and every systems that they were using, right?
Yes. Excellent. That's exactly right. So for those of you that might not have heard, so the Old Navy, or America's Navy case was a more light-handed approach to systems thinking. So they went, well, we know that different types of media interact with one another, and we're going to leverage that. We're going to map that communication flow. But what Bank of America did was take it to that next level too, and not looking only at, well, what are the different media and how do they interact, but what is the relative importance of those media in generating those leads or generating those deposit accounts. Excellent, yeah. So because of time constraints, guys, we might start into our next activity was looking at the different, what are the differences between design thinking and systems thinking? And just to be clear, something I picked up a little bit on in the discussions was, remember that systems thinking is not an execution. So it's not, oh, we just have to use lots of media together. Systems thinking is just like design thinking. Like, you wouldn't look at a campaign and go, oh, is that social media campaign design thinking? No, it's not the same thing. Design thinking might have informed that campaign, but it's not the same thing. So similar with systems thinking. Remember, it's an approach to solving a problem, not the execution itself. So the quote here is from one of the articles that we're talking about the transition that's happening from design thinking to systems thinking in industry. So design thinking was kind of the big thing in developing digital strategy, but more and more systems thinking is being encouraged because of its whole of system approach. So it's seen as where it's going in the future. Is one system better than the other? Not necessarily. One might be more suited to a particular problem than the other. And let's talk a little bit about that. So this article said that design thinking is meant to innovate new solutions based on bottom-up, human-centered approach. So what is it that drives you as an individual? I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do an empathy map with you. How do you think? How do you feel about joining America's Navy? What would motivate you to do that? What are your associations with that brand or that opportunity? So design thinking, starting with the customer, starting with the human at the center of the problem. And in the America's Navy's case, it was women. So young women. So start with the human at the center of the problem. And then empathize with that person to the point where you can step into their shoes and know what they're thinking and feeling and how they're going to react to campaign material. Yeah. Systems thinking is not human-centered. No. So it takes stakeholder perspectives, but from a systems point of view. Only in as far as it informs what system the system looks like for different people. Right? So think about it, depending on your if you were a switcher compared to the young adults looking for a checking account. What does your path to purchase look like relative to switches? Different. But I don't care about the individual so much as what is the overall system doing. So the majority of young people are going first and doing an online search. Then they're going and they're checking with their friends and family. Then they're going through this other media channel. But it's not so focused on the individual. So they say systems thinking is meant to innovate new solutions based on a top-down, a broad approach, a big picture view, not focused on the people at the center, but focused on the system at the center of the problem. Does that make sense? So can you see where there might be some overlaps? So we actually identified, this group over here identified an overlap in that customer journey maps can be used in both as a tool for both systems thinking and design thinking. Yeah, definitely, they can. But there are also lots of other tools that are used. So design thinking, we talk about empathy maps a lot, ethnographies, interviews, techniques that are really meant to develop a really in-depth understanding of the consumer, whereas your systems thinking, not so much focused on the consumer, focused on the system. What does the big picture look like? So what do you think, what type of problems do you think would be best suited to one or the other? Is there anything off the top of the head that you think, well, this type of problem in digital strategy might be more suited to design thinking or systems thinking? No? All right. I'll repeat the question. No, that's fine. It's just for the recording so that people can hear what other people said too. Yes.
An improvement that can be made in the chain. Maybe, that's what, it's a strategy.
Yeah.
Something like that. Maybe it's better to...
Is it like
okay.
When a business has to target some individual audience, then design thinking is more suitable. But when they have to look at how the campaign should be done or how the strategy should be formulated, systems thinking should be used. Is it like that?
Could be, yeah. So there's no hard or fast rule here. I should have prefaced it. There's no right or wrong answer here. But depending on how you look at it. So those are excellent points. So, for example, I'll just repeat for the other people that might not have heard. With design thinking, if the problem centers around acquiring new customers and perhaps understanding why people are not interested in your particular brand, then perhaps design thinking where you get that in-depth understanding is a more appropriate approach. Where if you think that there's a problem in for the lack of a better term, system, so people do have a preference for your brand, but it's just getting lost in the cacophony of other, advertisements. It's getting drowned out, or there's a problem with people signing up via your website, or that type of thing. Then perhaps a systems thinking approach might be more suited. Yeah. Yeah.
If you talk about goods where FMCGs are considered, they don't have a specific target audience. Like everyone is their audience because everyone consumes food. So at that time, would it be a design thinking to improve their strategies, or would it be system thinking? So I think that could be an example for system thinking.
Yeah. I would argue that fast-moving consumer goods do have specific target audiences. I agree they might be quite broad, but they do have specific target audiences.
If you say bottled waters,
yeah.
and if I consider my target audience, then what target audience would that have? It could be people consuming water, right? Like most of them.
Yeah, but there's so for example, be people that are looking for convenience. So they don't have water available. So the question was, well, does it depend on how broad your target audience is? I don't know that it does. So if you're talking about bottled water, for example, as you said, is that a really broad target audience? Is that everyone? I don't think it is, because there are people that actively don't drink bottled water because of the recycling issue. There are people that worry about plastic contamination in the water. So I don't think it is everyone that drinks bottled water. It'd be people that are looking for convenience at a particular time point. So there's just no access to water. I forgot my water bottle at home, that sort of thing. So me personally, I try and avoid bottled water if I can. But yeah, so does that, it depends again on what the problem is. I don't think it depends on the target audience. I hear what you're saying. So if it's a broad target audience, does that mean that systems thinking is more applicable? Because you don't need that nuanced understanding. Yeah, and that's the point that you're making. I think it's a good point.
But if there are examples that there's something
Yeah.
that calls in the works, so like for
Yeah.
example, calls bring in click and collect or bring in, delivery to home, would that be a better kind of example of systems thinking rather than being an emotive, well, I guess there's an emotive side of it if I'm time poor, I don't have
Yeah.
kids in the car, whatever.
No, that's a good point. So just remember that that's the execution, not the thinking. But could it have led to the introduction of delivery? Yes, it could have, because people they could have gone to market and gone, well, what are the touch points? What are the pain points? And can we alleviate that so people purchase more from us? Oh, yes, we can through delivery. So what are the ways that people collect groceries or do their shopping? And is there an alternative way that we can provide for them so they increase their shopping with us? Possibly, yeah. It's hard to know. It would more be a problem. So, for example, systems thinking is quite good at problems like we have high brand awareness and high preference, but this is not resulting in sales. So people like our product, people are aware of it, but we're still, market follower, not market leader. So what's happening here? So we might have to map the entire purchase journey to see, well, where are people dropping off? Where are people falling out of the cart, for lack of the better word? Yeah, where's the attrition happening? Yeah, so is it when they get to the store, they realize that product is not in stock, and then they purchase an alternative product? Could be something like that. Or if you look at it from a specific digital point of view, it could be we have, great socials. We've invested a lot in search engine optimization, but we're still not getting website visitors. So what's happening in that media landscape that's preventing that from happening? So is it because we're, the second in line, plus people get distracted by a paid search ad that comes up at the same time as our organic search? Right? So it's about thinking about things generally and broadly. So the types of problems that design thinking is good at is when people might be aware, but they have a low preference. Why don't they like our brand? Right? So where you really have to understand the human element, the human underpinnings. Or it could be, we think we have really engaging content on our social media. We think we have an excellent social media strategy, but we're just not getting the engagement that we expect. So people are following us, but they're not liking our content. So what's happening there? And in that case, it might be a design thinking approach, because you go talk to your followers. So what type of content would you like to see? Why are you not engaging with the content that we're providing? Does that make sense? Any other observations about the differences or similarities between design thinking and systems thinking? Yeah?
There was a step in design thinking that you have to build a prototype, then test it. But in systems thinking, they build strategies and they formulate a strategy, but they don't test it and iterate. There's no iteration process.
That's a very good point. Yes, so design thinking does have more emphasis on iteration, prototyping and testing. Definitely does. So that's an excellent point, actually. So systems thinking, you map, you draw your conceptual map of what the perfect system would look like, and then you match it, well, soft systems methodology anyway. You draw what your perfect system would look like. Oh, well, people will first see my display ad, and then they'll click on my display ad, and then it will take them to the website. And on the website, the second click, there will be the form that they have to fill out or whatever. So you design the perfect system according to your different stakeholders. And then you compare it with reality. And go, okay, well, where are the differences? And let's try and fix those differences. So people don't click on my display ad, for example. So what's happening there? What can we do to reinforce that message? Maybe we need to do some retargeting. Maybe we need to set our target audiences more narrowly on our different platforms. So it definitely has a, let's design, it's just a different approach. Let's design the perfect system, compare it to real world, and then fix what the difference is. So that's systems thinking. Design thinking is, well, let's co-create some ideas, and then prototype and test, prototype and test.
Is it system thinking, I've seen like a private school that has great ads, great connection on media, all of that stuff, but their actual product is not good.
Yeah.
So they're not getting the OPs, they're not getting the scores and that sort of thing. So would system thinking take them through that journey, telling them it's not actually their design, it's their product?
Yeah, it could, because it could. So it could look at the big picture there, definitely. Yeah, so it could include aspects of the product as well, but not necessarily. Depends on how large you're looking at in terms of the system. Yeah, it could. But does that make sense? So soft systems methodology, the expert, i.e. you, design what you think is the perfect system, the perfect path to purchase. And then you go, oh, but that doesn't match reality. So how do we get reality to match my perfectly designed system? Exactly. That's exactly right. So systems thinking looks for those strategic gaps between what I think is my perfect media landscape. This is how it's supposed to work, or this is my perfect system. And then it looks at reality, and then whatever gaps there are, it tries to address. Where design thinking has a slightly different approach to that. It co-creates the solution. It designs the solution with the people that are involved. So it's not the expert, it's not me that have drawn the perfect path to purchase, but it's talking to consumers, building a solution with them, and then testing it with the people that are actually involved. Yeah. So those are the differences between the methodologies or the processes. Absolutely right. Yeah. So we talked about differences in terms of conceptual differences, what problems they're most suited to, but they also have quite a different methodology to actually solving those problems. Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any examples of people using hybrid?
Yes, lots. Yeah. No, it's not a silly question at all, and they are quite complementary.
Well, yeah, one kind of versus council, kind of like
SIBO. Excellent. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the comment that Sally has made too in Reload Consulting. That is probably a hybrid approach between the two. For the purposes of the assignment, though, to demonstrate, and that's why I said in the assignment, please don't say both, because yes, the optimal solution is both, right? That's the optimal solution. But we've got to recognise that that's also resource intensive, not only in timing, but also investment in terms of research and so things. So for the assignment purposes, to make sure that you understand the different approaches. We've said please choose one. But you're absolutely right in that they're complementary. Yeah. Excellent. All right, guys, we run over time. Sorry about that. I know that you probably want to just race out of here, but if you do have any specific questions, feel free to come have a chat to me. I'll turn off the recording.